And here I'm hosting conversations with musicians and music scholars. We'll be talking about classical music and ethnic music through the lens of music history and music cognition and ethnomusicology. It's true that music speaks for itself, but I find that music appreciation can be greatly enhanced by analyzing its elements, melody, rhythm, and harmony, and also looking into the historical context in which it is set. But this knowledge often remains behind the closed doors of music classrooms between the teacher and the student. So my goal with these conversations is to bring this knowledge out into the open and also try to solve some of the puzzles hidden in the works of classical music here in real time. So my guest today is Stephen Perkyns, who is a principal cellist of the New York City Ballet Orchestra. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
So why don't we start off with you telling us about your background in music and how you came to play cello?
Sure. So I come from a relatively musical family. Mm-hmm. My mom grew up playing piano. She's still a pianist, professionally. Piano teacher, performs a lot. My dad used to play cello. My parents actually met at a summer music camp when they were teenagers. Playing, I think, some cello sonata. They were grouped up or something. He didn't continue to play music, but when my brother and I were born, growing up, he would bring out his cello, and after school, like in preschool, I would come home and ask him to take out his cello, and I would pretend to play on it. It was obviously too big for me. I wasn't making any sounds, but I was pretending like I was really shredding, you know. But then when I went to kindergarten, first grade, I was lucky enough to go to a public school that had a classical strings program. And they asked me if I wanted to play an instrument, and my answer was, I already play cello. And so they just gave me a quarter-size cello, and then I've been playing cello since then. My relationship with cello has kind of been on and off while growing up. I always played it, but it was sometimes a struggle to actually keep it going. I wanted to do other things. I was super into sports, and then with other musical instruments, I started picking up electric guitar, electric bass, just doing the garage band kind of thing with my friends. Started to self-teach how to play jazz guitar, but eventually cello was the thing to do. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
So each episode will be discussing a piece of music chosen by the guest musician, and in this case it's going to be two movements, third and fourth, of Lamentations, Black Folk Suite for Solo Cello by the 20th century American composer Coleridge-Taylor Perkinson. So why don't we go ahead with the performance and then delve into analyzing it.
Great, sounds good.
So why would you say the piece is called Lamentations? Because when I first heard it, it felt nothing like Lamentations, to be honest, or at least my idea of what lament is music is like, which I imagine it's more mournful and soothing and melodic, whereas both of these movements are very rhythmic, and they, in my mind, they don't have an association with a lament. And that's why it feels like a subversion of the genre.
Yeah, I definitely understand that, coming from, especially in the more classical sense of what a lamentation is. To me, I associate it a lot with, at least emotionally, somewhat like a funeral march, that kind of, where it's really full of sorrow. And in classical music, there is a thing called the lament bass, which is kind of a compositional technique just to evoke that kind of sorrowness, which neither of these movements, or even in any of the movements of this suite, none of them have that lament bass. But to really, there's actually a quote from Perkinson about this piece, saying that what really brings all of these different works together, the common denominator, it's a expression and reflection of a people's crying out. So the idea of you can still have sorrow, but the crying out aspect, there is, I'm sure, there is some sort of lament music classically out there where there's moments of where you kind of do this really big expressive thing, like it just overtakes you. And to me, the last movement really feels like that, where it's this constant motion, and then within it it already shows this kind of uneasy feeling, and then within it there's still these big waves. With it also being the last movement, it feels like it's all of the internal struggles are kind of, you can't deal with them anymore, you can't hold them in anymore.
Yeah, and the titles of the movements are also telling, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the first two movements which I didn't play, fuguing tune and song form, which are very interesting to me because in a suite, classically in a suite, it's instrumental music, the most famous for cellos is the Bach cello suites. It's all dance movements, instrumental. It's all about that. But fuguing tune and song form evoke singing. It's all about, like, the fuguing tune, I originally thought was just a fugue, but doing more research, it's actually a compositional form for choir, where the composer takes a tune, and it's basically the same composition, like techniques as a fugue, where there's the main line and then other voices do the same line and different, and they play off of each other. I'm sure there's other subtleties and other things that make it a fuguing tune rather than a fugue. But it harkens back to kind of an Old English choir form. And then song form is a song. Everyone knows what a song is. To me, that one probably evokes the most sorrow, the closest to what we had agreed a lamentation is before coming into this. And then also this cavalry ostinato, or cavalry ostinato, is actually, cavalry is a spiritual. So again, it evokes singing. And it's
and it refers to the hill outside of Jerusalem where crucifixion happened. So
right.
It's very like pain-laden.
It's not just that, but it was a song that kind of was a metaphor also for lynching, which is another, I mean, again, Lamentations, like just thinking about that, the outcry of a people. It's what's incredible is it brings pizzicato, a technique that we don't really, as classical musicians, get a whole lot of training on. It's just kind of like an effect almost. And
whereas in this case, the whole piece is written in pizzicato.
It's entirely pizzicato. It's very similar, I would say, to the first movement, the fuguing tune, in terms of having to play several different voices on one instrument. Like there's the ostinato, there's the melody, there's the harmony. And then the last movement, perpetual motion, which I already talked about a little bit, but what's interesting to me about calling it perpetual motion is it's the only title of any of the movements that actually is traditionally a classically instrumental form. Everything else being hearkening to song form. So I'm sure there can be interpretations of these lamentations being an outcry, being these songs that you can only get out through an instrument, kind of the having to hide behind the instrument in order to really show your feelings and everything.
So can you show the different voices in the third movement?
Sure.
And the ostinato and the other ones. And there's also a fair bit of string bending, which I guess what makes the piece sound so jazzy also.
Right, yeah. And that's actually a really good point to bring up because there are so many influences outside of the classical genre that are coming into this. With Perkinson, really, he was very prolific and was delved into a lot of different types of music, jazz being something that he was also really known for. But yeah, so in the third movement, the ostinato, first of all, an ostinato is actually very similar to, I think I had mentioned before, a lament bass. The lament bass is a 4-note descending scale, basically, where there's different harmonies on top, but it kind of loops. So the most famous being is the... An ostinato is similar in the fact that it is still looping, but the values of the notes are different. So the ostinato in this is this measure. It goes. And then it loops. What's interesting to me about that is it's almost the same phrase twice with a little bit of the there's a rhythmic lilt almost to it. But that is almost consistent throughout. There's a couple of moments where he changes it up a little bit, and I don't know if it's necessarily for a harmonic reason. I don't know where he, instead of going down, he goes up a little bit. It could be a harmonic reason. I think it's mostly a technical reason. It's almost impossible, the notes that he wants in the melody and the harmony. But the melody is usually what I'm playing on the top string, the A string, or D string, whatever is the top of that. Mm-hmm. But it's the... That's whatever that... It keeps going, it develops, all of that stuff. And that melody is based off of the spiritual, which he actually does use in one other of his works. His first string quartet is based also on that, which to me is also interesting, just going on a tangent here, because this piece being the Black Folk Song Suite, that is the only actual music that he brings from somewhere else. All of the others, at least from what I can understand, are his own melodies, just sort of based off of other music that he knows. But the cavalry is an actual spiritual that he brings in, and obviously, I think he even says he never meant to write it. It just kind of came out. And then once he realized, exactly, and as soon as he realized it was cavalry, he was like, I have to, that's what it is. So there's that, and then as it develops more, usually when I'm plucking on the middle strings, those will be harmonies added to the melody. So the second time I go through it, the melody again being... The second time I go, and then ostinato, and then it's like, something like that. He's adding on those just insanely difficult to hear and difficult to play passages. But adding all three of those voices together is kind of a tongue twister almost for your fingers. But yeah, a lot of, like you said, the pitch bending, which is not explicitly written in the music, but he adds slurs into the music, which you can interpret as phrase markings. Or if you had a bow, it would be several notes under one bow without changing. But because you're plucking, you can't... The only way to do several notes on one pluck is kind of sliding around a little bit. So, and I think it's stylistically, it makes sense.
Yeah, it's a very cool sound also.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like in this movement, cello sounds almost like a guitar, you know?
Yeah.
So it's, awesome.
Yeah, it's that, and then also going into the last movement, some people say it evokes, going into different instruments, it evokes a banjo sound, which we could get into, but yeah. Different influences with the songs, different influences with other instruments is, it's hard not to hear 10 different things in the same piece, just because it evokes so much, you know.
Yeah, it seems that the fourth movement is the most rhythmically complex. There's so much happening there, and also it sounded very modern to me, almost something that Zoe Keating would write. Even though like a bit more jazzy than that. So can we go over those like rhythmic elements in the fourth movement?
Completely. Yeah. So rhythmically, it's a perpetual motion, which, as the name implies, it just never stops. It keeps going. It's written down as the meter is in 6/8, which means one measure is 6/8 notes, and then it's written in 16th notes. So every measure, I'm playing 12 notes. Every other note is sort of this droning note, but he he goes back and forth between the melody and the droning note. Because he could have easily written something like that being the melody. But he keeps, at least at the very beginning, he alternates from the melody and the note D. That is, bringing up the banjo thing, people say it harkens to a banjo. With a lot of banjo playing, they do a lot of this fast stuff and it go alternating back and forth, that kind of thing. I think it might be a little bit of a stretch, but people do hear that. But with it being in 6/8 and having the 12 notes in a bar, he's able to change the rhythmic emphases throughout. So he changes it from a 6/8 to a 3/4, which the difference being, instead of 2 beats of 3/8 notes having that kind of feel, he changes it to 3 beats of 2/8 notes, kind of reversing it. So the difference being the 6/8 would sound like so this that would be the 6/8 feel. And then a lot of what I was doing was kind of expanding it a little bit, but those are written as quarter notes rather than dotted quarter notes, showing that these bars are kind of a reverse of the 6/8. But then also within 6/8, he changes a lot of how many notes are emphasized and the bowings of everything. So, for example, again, the beginning, everything is separate, but he adds a lot of slurs where the first 2 notes are kind of its own thing and then it's a third. So like that it's like a 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2, that kind of thing. It can also feel like a beat of a bar of 4 or something like that. There's a lot of complexities within that, and he even adds. There's one section where he has measures where he adds an extra 8th note. And where he does that, everything is very consistent with how many beats are in a bar, except for this place, which is one of my favorite moments in the entire piece. It's somewhere in the middle where it goes. Where's it? That he adds an extra beat, showing one. It sounds super cool, but it really shows that he really wants that sound emphasized extra. There's some sort of off-kilter feeling. There's a lot of meaning behind just adding one extra 8th note to it.
It almost like it's at the danger of stopping, but it still keeps going.
Right, exactly. It's like, I'm not quite done yet, or like if you were to feel this as somewhat of a dance, it's like you trip almost a little bit, or the subversion of the I'm going 3 minutes or something by this point, I don't know exactly how long, of this relatively consistent beat pattern. It switches, but it's always the same 6/8 notes. And then he adds this thing. I think there is a way where he could have just kept it the same, but this way really adds the emphasis to it, kind of. I don't know if it's this anger or something, this emotion, impatience, something like that. No,
it's great. It does sound very modern. I don't know when this piece was written, but probably somewhere like in the middle of 20th century, but it sounds something like end of 20 or like early 21st.
Right. It is very, like, if you played this during Mozart's time, people would have no idea what to listen for. But it is, he is a composer that really straddled between tonal music and atonal music. So music that has a tonal center, like a G major is a tonal key, and then atonality, which just means there is no pull towards a certain sound. And with this, it is very there are moments that it's just like what are these notes? Even in the third movement, this like that sound, I don't know where that's going, you know.
Yeah.
But throughout all the craziness in the last movement too, it is very tonal, I feel.
Yeah.
It feels like there's always a direction on where he wants to take you. Certain notes lead to other notes still. And the fact that he has this drone itself shows that there is a sound that he wants as the home base, which for the majority of the piece is this D. The first two measures are just 24 Ds in a row. So it's obvious that he's really trying to get you to hear that as the home base, and everything else is kind of going super far away or coming back to that area. But yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, are there any recordings of this piece that you would recommend? Is it performed often? Because this was the first time I came across it when you mentioned.
This is a very, for how great of a piece I feel this is, it is very underperformed. In terms of recordings, there's hardly any out there. There's one, the one that I found that really turned me, or made me love this piece was the principal cellist of the Cleveland Orchestra has a recording that he made. I think it was during COVID, and I think it's on YouTube. I think it's been on and off of YouTube.
I will link it.
Yeah. It's a great one. But there's also on Spotify. I forget the name. I forget her name, but there is an album on Spotify that has, it's a bunch of Perkinson's works. And that it has the cello suite on it, and that recording is super interesting too because she worked directly with Perkinson on this piece. So just hearing her interpretation of it, also being straight from the source of who wrote it.
Yeah, and he died also not so long ago, like 20 years ago. Or
something like that. Yeah. It's a very recent piece, but yeah. It's a lot. I think it's becoming more and more popular as of recently, which is very exciting. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
it was
thanks
a great
for having
pleasure.
me. Thank you.
Thanks
a
lot.
Great to be here.